The military Hummer hadn't crashed by accident. It had been forced off an icy ridge, buried in snow at the bottom of a frozen ravine. Inside, two Navy SEAL sisters, Hannah and Claire Reed, lay bruised, handcuffed, and barely conscious as the blizzard closed in, inch by inch. The man who wanted them gone trusted the storm to finish the job. But miles away, in a lonely cabin deep in Montana, a 42-year-old veteran sat quietly by the fire, his green military jacket worn and collar faded by time. Beside him, his German shepherd, Ranger, suddenly lifted his head, not barking, not growling, just listening. Through the silence, a faint distress pulse whispered across the snow. And everything changed. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story stirs your heart, please subscribe for more. Snow did not fall that night. It slashed across the sky like fragments of broken glass, driven by a fierce Montana wind that howled through the pines as if nature itself was trying to erase something. Deep in the wilderness near Bozeman, a cabin stood silent beneath layers of snow and time. Inside, Ethan Walker, 42, sat before the fire, neither reading nor sleeping, just staring. His green military winter field jacket, worn from years of use, hung around broad shoulders that once carried more weight than mere fabric. The collar, faded and slightly frayed, curled like a memory that refused to straighten. His steel-gray eyes reflected the flames, but they were not watching the fire. They were watching something behind it, something far away, in deserts and mountains and nights that had no stars. His face was rugged, lined by both wind and war, with faint stubble across his jaw and hair streaked with silver that looked too early for his age. The war had ended, but not for him. On the floor near the door, Ranger lay perfectly still, yet not asleep. The German shepherd, 7 years old, with a thick sable coat that shimmered bronze and black under firelight, had the posture of a sentinel who had never truly retired. One of his ears twitched, then both. He stood, slowly, not barking, not growling, just listening. Ethan noticed instantly, not because the dog moved, but because silence had changed. It wasn't the silence of night anymore. Something was inside it. He rose, pulling on heavy gloves, his instincts waking like they used to when orders came crackling through a radio at 2 a.m. He stepped to the frosted window, wiped a circle, and saw nothing but blowing white. Still, Ranger stood at the door, unmoving, ears cut like shadows against the dark. Listening. Something was out there. It didn't feel like threat. It felt like something trying to survive being forgotten. Ethan zipped his jacket to his chin, pulled on his boots, and without a word, opened the cabin door. The wind hit them like a living thing, sharp and furious. Ranger walked ahead, quiet but certain. He didn't sniff the ground or search for tracks. He listened. His paws sank into thick snow as though he knew exactly where to go even when the world had been swallowed by the storm. They moved through pines that creaked under heavy ice, through gusts of white that stung skin like needles. Ethan had walked through sandstorms before. This was colder, but somehow familiar. Then Ranger stopped at the edge of a ridge. That was when Ethan saw it, a flicker of dull metal through the snow below, a shape that didn't belong to nature. He descended carefully, boots slipping, gloved hand gripping icy branches for balance. The wind calmed just long enough for him to recognize the shape. A military Hummer. It was tilted sideways, half buried in snow, as though something had pushed it off the road and tried to let nature swallow it. Ranger growled, not loud, just a low vibration of certainty. The windshield was shattered from the inside. The doors bent inward. Ethan's pulse changed. He stepped closer. There, inside the Hummer, were two women. Still. cold, but not gone. He wiped away ice from the window with his sleeve. Their uniforms were torn, but recognizable. Navy SEALs, both young, both strong, but broken tonight. The first, Hannah Reed, looked to be in her late 20s, olive skin turned pale, freckles hidden beneath frost. Her dark hair, now stiff with ice, stuck to her face. She was cuffed by the wrists to the steering column, metal cutting into skin rubbed raw. The second, Claire Reed, her sister, slightly taller, sandy brown hair, features softer but bruised, lay half-conscious, her hand pressed weakly against her stomach where blood had dried into her uniform. A faint scar above her eyebrow whispered of past battles and stubborn survival. These were not crash victims. They had been handcuffed, beaten, abandoned, and left for the storm to finish. A storm does not hide mercy. It hides evidence. Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not quite anger, not quite fear, but the familiar heaviness of responsibility. The kind soldiers feel when they realize they are now the only chance someone has. He forced open the frozen door with his shoulder, lifted Claire first. She was light, alarmingly light, and slung her carefully over his arm. He returned for Hannah, unlocking the handcuffs using a multi-tool he had carried out of habit for years. Her hand was cold. Ranger pressed his nose into her palm, and her fingers faintly curled. She was alive. Not much time. The walk back through the storm was harder. Snow fought their every step. Wind argued with them like a stubborn enemy. But Ranger stayed ahead, looking back every few seconds as though refusing to let them fall behind. When they reached the cabin, Ethan lowered the women near the fire, wrapped them in blankets, and monitored the steady rise and fall of their faint breathing. Ranger lay beside them, eyes open but calm. He had carried out his duty, not with his teeth, but with his ears. Ethan looked at the two unconscious soldiers, then at his faded jacket hanging near the fire, and finally at Ranger. He had not been looking for a mission. But sometimes, a mission finds you. Snow hammered against the cabin walls, not like flakes, but like 1,000 small fists demanding entry. The storm outside wailed through the Montana timberland like a wounded animal, while inside, silence grew heavier by the minute. Ethan Walker knelt by the fire, breath steady, expression sharp, his faded green military jacket now dusted with melting snow. His movements were calm, precise, almost surgical, like a man who had once learned to save lives in the same breath he had been trained to take them. He gently laid Claire Reed, the taller of the two injured Navy SEAL sisters, on a thick elk-hide rug near the wood stove. Her breathing was shallow, her sandy brown hair tangled across her blood-stained collar, face pale but strong, her body shaking from shock and cold. Across the room, Hannah Reed lay on a stacked pile of blankets, her dark hair stiff with ice crystals, her lips cracked, bruises spreading like ink beneath her skin. Their uniforms, though torn and frozen, still carried their unit insignia, dirtied but brave. Ranger sat at the cabin door, ears forward, chest wide, tail still, his posture not defensive, not fearful, but alert, as though he understood that whatever danger had left these soldiers here might still be searching. Ethan moved with the efficiency of someone long accustomed to triage and battlefield medicine. He cut away frozen fabric with trauma shears, not hesitating even when patches of bruised flesh were revealed. The cold had preserved them, but not protected them. He carefully wrapped Hannah in thick blankets lined with wool and thermal foil, layering them to trap heat from the fire. He placed her hands near the stove, not too close, but close enough for warmth to awaken life rather than burn fragile flesh. She did not stir, not yet. He checked her pulse, weak, thready, but there. He then turned to Claire, whose breathing had begun to deepen, though her face tightened with pain. He spoke softly, steady. "You're safe now." She didn't hear him, but her pulse steadied, almost as if her body understood before her mind did. Then Ethan saw what he somehow already suspected. The bruises were too patterned, too linear to be the result of a crash. The swollen wrist bones, scraped raw, were not from accidental impact, but from cuffs locked too tight and pulled too hard. A purplish mark across Hannah's cheek wasn't frostbite. It was a palm print, a violent one. He paused, staring at the bruise. A hand too cruel to belong to a rescuer, too deliberate to belong to a stranger. He gently ran gauze over it, his jaw tightening. "This wasn't the storm," he muttered. Ranger shifted at the door, his tail now rigid, nose lifted, not toward the wind, but toward something else. He didn't bark. He simply watched, guarding, not just the cabin, guarding the truth. Claire stirred first. Her eyes fluttered open, hazel, sharp even while weak. She saw the cabin, the fire, then Ethan, and then Ranger. Her lips parted. But no words came. Only a faint nod. Recognition, not fear. Soldiers know soldiers, even without names. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her ribs, forcing her back. "Don't move," Ethan said gently, wrapping a support band around her torso. "Rest. You're safe here." Her voice came as a whisper, cracked and strained. "Safe. Not for long." Ethan paused. "What happened?" She didn't answer. She simply lifted her left hand, palm outward. A healing cut ran across the base of her thumb. Not sharp, not jagged, clean sliced. Tactical knife. Someone had taken something from her, something small, something important. He didn't press. Not yet. Hannah awoke moments later, panicked, disoriented. She jolted upright, choking for air, eyes searching. "Claire! Claire!" Ethan steadied her, but she flinched, not from him, but from memory. Ranger approached slowly, head low, ears back, making no sudden movement. Hannah saw the dog first, calm, trustworthy, and only then allowed herself to look at Ethan. She spoke not like a victim, but like a soldier giving a situation report. "It wasn't a crash. We were pushed. They handcuffed us. We weren't supposed to be found." Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from fury. Claire, voice soft, added, "They think the storm buried us. They think we're dead." Ethan nodded slowly. "Who?" Silence. Only fire crackling. Wind screaming outside. Ranger's breathing steady, low. Finally, Hannah spoke, voice cold. Not from weather, but from truth. "People trained like us. People meant to protect us." She looked at Ethan, her eyes steady now, strong. "Someone betrayed our unit." Ethan stared into the fire. He understood now. He didn't know the whole story, but he understood enough. This was not an accident. These women were not rescued by chance. Ranger sat taller now, watching the window, nose to the air, not just guarding the door, guarding a secret. That night, while the storm raged and the cabin grew warm, Ethan Walker, man who had left the war behind but carried its lessons still, knew something had been set in motion. The blizzard had silenced many things, but tonight, it had delivered a truth. Hannah woke to the crackle of firelight painting the cabin walls amber and gold. For a moment, panic flared in her chest. She pushed herself upright, breath quick, eyes searching for restraints, for danger. But Ranger stood between her and Ethan, not barking, not baring his teeth, just standing calm, steady, protective. That was how she knew she wasn't in enemy hands. Ethan Walker, 42, sat on a wooden chair pulled near the stove, jacket draped over his shoulders, the faded green collar catching the light like a war memory refusing to fade. His stillness didn't feel like threat. It felt like readiness. Not the sharp, reckless kind, but the kind that waited. watched. Claire was resting, bandaged, asleep on the elk hide. The storm outside had grown quieter now, but not safer. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace, but pause. Hannah glanced at Ethan, studying him now. His face was hard-edged but not cruel, his jawline rough with faint stubble, the look of someone who shaved only when it mattered. His hands were large, wrapped in gauze from pulling frozen car metal with bare fingers. War never truly left him, only changed the battlefield. She took one slow breath, then spoke. "You need to know this wasn't random." Ethan nodded. "I figured." She swallowed, eyes steady. "His name is Commander Blake Morrison." The name felt acidic coming out. "He wears medals that shine more than his honor ever did. He gives speeches about integrity and duty. He shakes hands with senators, smiles for cameras, visits military funerals even when he didn't know a single man who died." Ranger let out a low sound. Not growl, not whine. Just acknowledgement. Ethan didn't interrupt. "Morrison wasn't just commanding," Hannah continued. "He was orchestrating." She shifted, face tightening at the bruises along her ribs. "He exploited our transport routes, our SEAL convoys, said it was training logistics, classified movement drills. But it wasn't training. He was smuggling tech, modified targeting chips, drone guidance arrays, hard drives with restricted intel, sold piece by piece to the highest bidder." Claire, though exhausted, turned her head slowly, awake now, listening. "We discovered it by accident," Hannah said quietly. "Not through investigation, through error." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh, but not of humor. "We noticed one transport path didn't match orders, 6 degrees off normal route. Too small to be noticed, too precise to be innocent." Claire spoke, her voice soft but steady. "We traced the flight path to a private airstrip. From there, military cargo disappeared, without paperwork. Then," Hannah added, "we found bank records, encrypted drops, 2 million, then 8 million, then silence. And then he found us." Ethan's gaze sharpened, not with surprise but something much quieter. Recognition. "They didn't arrest us," Hannah said, "didn't threaten us, didn't bribe us. They just told us to get in a Hummer, classification breach, urgent reassignment. That was the cover." Her voice stiffened. "They cuffed us before we made it to the road." Claire's eyes darkened. "They didn't shoot us. They didn't even cover our tracks." "Morrison looked at us," Hannah whispered, and said, "The snow will do the rest." The fire flickered. Nobody spoke for a while. Finally, Ethan said quietly, "But it didn't." Ranger stepped forward, placing himself between the firelight and the storm-beaten window, like a silent sentinel. Hannah studied Ethan again, his faded jacket, his quiet focus, his readiness to help without asking why. "You left the battlefield," she said softly. "But it didn't leave you, did it?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside, the wind began to rise again, not screaming, not violent, just breathing, as though something out there was listening. The kind of quiet that wasn't peace but warning. The storm had quieted by dawn, but not in mercy. It had merely stepped aside, like a curtain being drawn for the real show to begin. On the small television in Ethan's cabin, old, dusty, powered by a generator that hummed softly, Commander Blake Morrison appeared before the cameras. He stood outside a military hangar in Helena, Montana, wrapped in a pristine dark navy coat, hair groomed, medals gleaming against a polished uniform that looked as though frost itself refused to touch it. His face was carved into a mask of concern, voice steady, dignified, perfectly rehearsed. We have reason to believe Lieutenant Hannah Reed and Ensign Claire Reed, sisters, elite SEAL operators, are missing in the mountains near Bozeman after displaying signs of psychological distress, he said, lowering his voice just enough to sound compassionate. They may be disoriented, vulnerable. We are launching a humanitarian rescue mission. His eyes glimmered, not with grief but with performance. He gestured to snowmobiles, pilots, emergency crews. Cameras flashed. Reporters nodded. The nation believed. And because they believed it was a rescue, no one would question why heavily armed men accompanied the search teams. In the cabin, Ethan watched in silence, arms crossed, jaw squared. Hannah stood by the wall, wrapped in blankets, her face pale but eyes burning, not with fear, but recognition. Claire leaned against the table, bandaged, bruised, but alert, and Ranger sat in front of the door, ears pricked, body still, watching the window as though he were waiting for someone he had already smelled on the wind. "Morrison's not coming to search," Hannah said, her voice flat. "He's coming to finish the job." Ethan nodded slowly. "He'll make it look noble." Claire exhaled, a slow, pained breath. "They'll find the Hummer. They'll find our tags. Then they'll say the storm buried us." She swallowed hard. "They'll say we didn't make it." Ranger didn't growl, but he did stand, stepping closer to the door, nose lifted, scenting the wind that slid through the crack near the frame. No bark, no restless movement, just a quiet response. He had detected presence. Human. Not near, but approaching. Ethan stood, slipping on his faded green field jacket. It fit differently now, newer tensions in old seams. He walked to the door but didn't touch the handle. He just looked out the frost-bitten window. Snowmobiles sliced across the tree line. 2, then 4, then 7. Leading them, a white Arctic patrol vehicle, bearing no military insignia, only a clean, polished humanitarian symbol on the hood. Morrison's mask. Minutes later, Commander Blake Morrison stood on Ethan's snowy porch, his coat still flawless, his boots untouched by mud, a man too clean for the wilderness he claimed to search. Morrison was in his late 40s, tall, impeccably groomed, silver at the temples not from age but from stylistic intent. His features were sharp, perfectly symmetrical, dangerous in their lack of flaw. His expression was grave, but his eyes had no warmth. He did not knock. He simply looked at Ethan, standing in the doorway, with lines carved by wind, time, and honest duty, and smiled a thin politician's smile. "You live awfully far out here," Morrison said mildly. Ethan didn't respond. Morrison's gaze slid past him, almost searching for something inside the cabin without stepping in. "We're searching for 2 female officers," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the mountains. "They may be unstable, confused. They could be dangerous." Ethan said nothing. His silence was not fear. It was refusal. That was when Ranger moved. He did not snarl. He did not bare teeth. He simply stepped between Ethan and Morrison, standing exactly in the doorway, shoulders squared, posture calm, eyes silent but unblinking. He held no aggression, only clarity. Morrison stopped mid-sentence, just for a moment. His face barely shifted, but his eyes flickered as though he had just been seen. Not as a commander, not as a decorated officer, but as a man pretending to be one. Ranger did not move. He simply looked at him. Not with fear, not with hatred, with truth. And Commander Morrison, polished, immaculate, untouchable, looked away first. He turned sharply, motioned his men forward. "Search the woods," he snapped. "We're losing daylight." But Ranger stayed at the door, still watching, not tracking enemies, but recognizing something. The difference between a uniform and a soldier. The hunt had begun. Night fell like a curtain of ink. No moon, no stars. Just a sky that felt like a void swallowing light, sound, and mercy. The cabin sat cloaked in darkness. Windows shuttered, fire extinguished. Every tool and shadow deliberately placed, not for war, but for survival. Ethan Walker moved through that darkness with a calm, steady presence, not like a soldier preparing for battle, but like someone preparing for time. The faded green military field jacket hung on his shoulders, stiff with cold, but alive with memory. Tonight, memories would not fight for him. Skills would. Ranger stood near the back door, not growling, not whining, just breathing, slow, controlled, vigilant. His eyes glowed faint amber in the dark, waiting for a signal he already understood. Snowmobiles approached again, but this time it wasn't cautious. It was aggressive. Headlights cut through pine trees, beams sweeping like searchlights across a prison yard. The first time, Morrison had come to look concerned. This time, he had come to silence. Metal scraped against bark, muffled radio chatter, boots pounding packed snow. More men, heavily armed. Not local authorities, mercenaries in tactical gear, faces covered, moving with practiced formation. They did not knock. They kicked. The first breach hammered the cabin door like thunder. But the door did not open. Not easily. Ethan had reinforced it with snow-wet timber and old metal bars welded from scavenged farm equipment, not to hold forever, but to delay. Gunfire ripped through darkness, warning shots, intimidation. They shouted commands, but their words were hollow against the quiet of a man who had nothing left to fear. In the attic, Hannah and Claire Reed waited, not hiding, not helpless. Claire sat against a wooden beam, bandages tight against her ribs, Glock 19 held in both hands, not for shooting without purpose, but for when purpose arrived. Hannah, bruised but defiant, watched the stairs, calculating. They were SEAL-trained. They knew how to fight. But Ethan had told them, "Tonight, do not try to win. Try to survive." The cabin became a labyrinth, not of rooms, but of choices. Ethan had prepared it silently. Shadows where footsteps vanished, corners where echoes deceived, narrow halls where intruders could not move in numbers. Ranger navigated it like he had walked it 100 times. He would pause beside a door, not barking, but tilting his head, listening, warning. Flashlights pierced windows, boots crashed through a side entry. Men entered. They swept rooms. They found nothing. No targets. No evidence. Just a cabin that felt like it was watching them back. Then, the night split open. A sound tore through the dark like a blade. Thump, thump, thump. Helicopter rotors. Close. Too close to be Morrison's. Searchlights cut through the dark. Blinding, sharp, pure white that exposed not just presence, but purpose. And then came the floodlights. Vehicles, crawlers, tactical teams, not imposters, but certified federal strike units. Snow churned as armored boots hit the ground. Floodlights hit the mercenary search teams, trapping them under daylight they could not command. At the front of the formation led a woman, tall, lean, with sharp posture and an expression that didn't require shouting to command compliance. She wore a dark NCIS tactical coat, blue-black, her hair tied back in a tight braid streaked with steel. Her skin was olive-toned, features disciplined, eyes dark and unwavering, eyes that had seen corruption before and had learned to recognize it fast. Her name was Special Agent Maya Ellison, Federal Counterintelligence, engineer-turned-investigator. Brilliant, analytical, calm as winter ice, except when faced with betrayal. That made her dangerous. She walked past armed federal agents, past seized mercenaries, past stunned Montana deputies, and stopped only when she reached Blake Morrison, who stood frozen in disbelief as two federal soldiers snapped cuffs around his wrists. His uniform was flawless, his medals still shining, his eyes no longer rehearsed. Agent Ellison looked at him, not with hatred, but with precise understanding. "Commander Morrison," she said evenly, "you're not being detained. You're being unmasked." Behind the cabin door, Ethan watched, not with triumph, only with relief. Hannah and Claire watched too, knowing what had been taken tonight was not just their safety, but their voice. Morning came in Bozeman weeks later. Spring softened the snow. Streams began to run. Mountains exhaled. The Reed sisters stood side by side, not as missing soldiers, but as federal investigators under armed witness protection, tasked now not with survival, but with testimony. Hannah looked stronger. Claire walked straighter. Their names were no longer rumors. They were records. Ethan restored the cabin, not perfectly, but honestly. Wood beams reinforced, windows patched, smoke rising again. And on the porch, Ranger lay in his usual spot, eyes bright, fur kissed by sunlight. But his collar, like Ethan's jacket, was frayed at the edges. They had seen storms, but had never stopped answering them. Later, Ethan carved a wooden sign and hung it above the door. It didn't say cabin or home or shelter. It simply said, "Safe house when storms come." Because not every warrior wears medals. Some wear faded jackets, and some carry truth, not in badges, but in scars. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive wearing medals or uniforms. They do not always come with flashing lights, loud sirens, or perfect timing. Sometimes they come quietly, wrapped in an old faded field jacket, on 4 loyal paws, or within the simple, stubborn belief that no life deserves to be forgotten in the storm. Perhaps that is how God works too, not always loudly, not always instantly, but always on time. In the silence before rescue arrives, in the strength to keep breathing when hope grows faint, in the warmth of a hand that refuses to let go, or a heart that chooses to stand guard when others turn away. Maybe faith is not just asking for help, but becoming the kind of person who hears the faint cry beneath the winds and chooses to answer. If this story stirred something in your heart, share it with someone who may be walking through a storm of their own. Before you go, tell us, where are you watching from, and what miracle are you praying for? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like if it moved you, and subscribe to join a community where no one walks through the blizzard alone. And may God guard you the way He guarded them, through storms, through silence, through the long, cold night. Because storms may try to bury us, but God never forgets us.